The words came through the floorboards, faint but clear, like a radio playing in another room. It's just a matter of time. He's almost dead anyway. My daughter's voice, Eliza. The sound of it, so casual and sharp, was a physical blow. It struck me with more force than any fist ever could. I was upstairs in my study, the room where I'd spent countless hours managing the accounts for the business my wife Martha and I had built from nothing. I wasn't sick. I wasn't dying. I was 68 years old, my heart was strong, and my mind, I thought, was as clear as ever. But in that single, brutal moment, I felt my entire world tilt on its axis. I had been looking for an old stock certificate, a relic from the early days of our company, Hearthwood Interiors. Martha had insisted we frame the first one, and I wanted to see it again, to feel that crisp paper that represented so much hope and hard work. My knees creaked as I knelt, my hands dusty from rummaging through a forgotten box in the back of the closet. That's when I heard them. Eliza and her husband, Marcus, were in the living room directly below me. Their voices, usually a welcome murmur in the quiet house, had taken on a conspiratorial tone. "Don't be so morbid, Eli," Marcus said, his voice a low rumble I'd come to associate with false sincerity. "We just need to be patient." "Patient? Marcus, I've been patient for 2 years, ever since Mom died," Eliza snapped back. The floorboards vibrated slightly with the force of her anger. "This house, the business, it should already be ours. Dad's just rattling around in it like a ghost. He doesn't need all this. We have plans. We have a life to build." A ghost. The word hung in the air, a cold, weightless thing. I froze, my hand hovering over a stack of old photographs. My breath caught in my chest. I wasn't a ghost. I was a man. Her father. The man who had taught her to ride a bike on the very lawn she was so eager to claim. The man who had held her when her first pet died, who had beamed with pride at her graduation, who had walked her down the aisle and placed her hand in Marcus's, trusting him to cherish her as I had. "The lawyers said the power of attorney is ironclad once he's deemed unable to manage his own affairs," Marcus continued, his voice smooth as oil. "A little nudge in the right direction, a few senior moments witnessed by the right people. Dr. Evans is on my golf league. He's sympathetic." "He's almost dead anyway," Eliza repeated, this time with a chilling finality. "We're just helping nature along. It's what's best for everyone." I slowly lowered myself to sit on the floor, the dust motes dancing in the single beam of afternoon light slanting through the window. My heart, which moments ago I had considered so strong, was now a frantic drum against my ribs. It wasn't the talk of money or property that wounded me so deeply. Martha and I had always intended for Eliza to inherit everything. It was the callousness, the dismissal, the image of my own daughter, my only child, waiting for me to die, not with sadness, but with a greedy, tapping impatience. She was looking at her father and seeing not a person, but an obstacle. The silence that followed their conversation was more damning than the words themselves. It was a silence filled with their shared understanding, their quiet, ugly pact. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, the old stock certificate forgotten in my lap. The scent of lemon polish and old paper, the familiar comforts of my study, suddenly felt alien. This house, my home for 40 years, was no longer a sanctuary. It was a waiting room, and I was the patient they were eager to see discharged. Something inside me, a core of warmth and trust that had defined my relationship with my daughter, turned to ice. It wasn't a loud, shattering break, but a quiet, cold freezing. I looked at my hands, the hands that had built this house, that had held my wife, that had cradled my daughter. They were trembling, but not from age or weakness. They were trembling with a new, unfamiliar feeling, a cold, clarifying rage. I wasn't dead, I wasn't even sick, and I would be damned if I let them bury me before my time. In the dusty silence of my study, surrounded by the ghosts of a life I thought was cherished, I made a quiet decision. The game had changed. They thought they were playing against a frail old man, a ghost rattling in the rafters. They were about to find out how wrong they were. I stayed in the study until the sun had bled from the sky, leaving the room in shades of gray and deep blue. I heard the front door close as Eliza and Marcus left, their laughter echoing up the stairs, a sound that now seemed grotesque and mocking. I didn't move. I needed the stillness to let the shock subside and allow the cold reality to settle in my bones. Every memory I had of Eliza over the past 2 years replayed in my mind, now cast in a sinister new light. Her insistence that I let her and Marcus handle the company's finances. "You've worked so hard, Dad. It's time for you to relax," she had said, her hand on my arm, her eyes full of what I had mistaken for loving concern. Her casual questions about my will, which I had brushed off as morbid curiosity. Her helpfulness in organizing my paperwork, taking my documents to a new family lawyer Marcus had recommended, a man I had never met. Each memory was a small, sharp piece of glass, and together they formed a mosaic of profound betrayal. They hadn't just been waiting, they had been actively plotting, laying the groundwork for my eventual dispossession. The power of attorney Marcus mentioned. I had a vague recollection of signing some papers a few months ago. Eliza had brought them over, a thick stack of them. "Just standard updates for the estate, Dad. Marcus's lawyer says it's better to get it all in order now, to make things easier later." I had been distracted that day, grieving an anniversary of Martha's passing, and I had signed where she pointed, trusting her completely. The thought that I had signed away my own autonomy, my own life's work, sent a wave of nausea through me. Slowly, deliberately, I stood up. My knees protested, but I ignored them. I walked over to the large oak desk that had been Martha's grandfather's. I switched on the green banker's lamp, and its familiar glow cast a small, determined circle of light in the darkness. I was not a ghost. A ghost has no agency. A ghost cannot fight back. I was very much alive. My first move was one of strategic retreat. The next morning, I packed a single suitcase. I found Eliza in the kitchen, sipping coffee and scrolling through her phone. She looked up, a bright, false smile spreading across her face. "Morning, Dad. You're up early," she chirped. "I'm going to stay in the guest house for a while," I said, my voice even and calm. I was surprised at my own composure. The rage from the night before had cooled into something harder, more focused. It was like steel. "I feel like I'm underfoot here. Need a bit of my own space." Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second. A flicker of confusion, maybe suspicion, crossed her face before being replaced by practiced solicitude. "Oh, Dad, don't be silly. You're not underfoot. This is your house." "Nevertheless," I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. "It's what I want. The guest house has been empty for too long. It'll be good for me to have a little project, getting it aired out." The guest house was a small 2-room cottage at the far end of the property, originally built for Martha's aging mother. It was self-contained, with its own kitchenette and phone line. It was perfect. It offered me distance. It offered me privacy. From there, I could observe them without being observed. "Well, if you're sure," she said, trying to sound supportive, "we can help you move your things." "No need. I'm just taking a few essentials," I said, already moving toward the back door. "Don't worry about me." The look on her face as I walked away was a complex mixture of relief and unease. She had gotten what she wanted, the main house to herself, but not in the way she had planned. My voluntary retreat was an unexpected move. It put me outside of her direct influence, outside of her daily scrutiny. I could see in her eyes that this deviation from their script bothered her. Good. Once inside the guest house, I locked the door and leaned against it, my heart pounding. The air was stale, thick with the scent of dust and disuse. But to me, it smelled like freedom. It smelled like a fortress. My first call was not to a lawyer, but to an old friend, Frank Peterson. We had worked together for 30 years before he retired. He was a master accountant, a man who could read a balance sheet like a poet reads verse. "Frank," I said when he picked up, "it's Tom. I need a favor, a big one, and it needs to be completely off the books." I spent the next week in self-imposed exile, creating a new routine. I told Eliza I was enjoying the peace and quiet, that I was reading and pottering in the small garden. In reality, I was working. I had a second laptop I'd kept in storage, and I set up a new, secure internet connection. Frank Peterson, bless his loyal heart, had agreed to help immediately. He sensed the urgency in my voice and asked no questions. Just tell me what you need, Tom. You know I've always had your back. My first task was to understand the extent of the damage. I still had online access to my personal bank accounts, but I suspected the real action was happening within the business accounts, the ones Eliza and Marcus had so eagerly taken over. I started with my own finances. It didn't take long to find the first red flag. A new credit card had been issued in my name 3 months ago. I hadn't authorized it. The statements, which were being sent electronically to a new email address I didn't recognize, showed a litany of extravagant purchases. Designer clothes for Marcus, a spa weekend for Eliza, expensive dinners at restaurants I'd never heard of. They were living off my money, bleeding me dry while waiting for me to die. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. They weren't even being subtle. It was a testament to how little they thought of me, how convinced they were that I was already gone, a doddering old fool who wouldn't notice a thing. But this was just the surface. The real prize was the business. Hearthwood Interiors was my legacy. It was Martha's legacy. It represented a lifetime of shared dreams and tireless effort. The thought of it being hollowed out and sold for parts by Marcus, a man who had never done a hard day's work in his life, was unacceptable. Getting access to the business accounts was harder. My old login credentials had been changed. Of course they had. This was where Frank's genius came in. He guided me through back channels I never knew existed. We used my personal details, my social security number, my mother's maiden name, the foundations of my identity, to slowly and carefully pry open the digital doors they had locked. It took 3 days of painstaking work, 3 days of me sitting in the dusty guest house, the glow of the laptop illuminating my face, while just 100 yards away, my daughter and her husband lived in my house, ate my food, and spent my money, utterly oblivious. On the 3rd night, we broke through. The screen flickered, and then the main accounting portal for Hearthwood Interiors loaded. I felt a surge of adrenaline, a feeling of illicit triumph. Frank was on the phone with me, his voice a calm presence in my ear. "All right, Tom, we're in. Let's see what they've been up to." What we found was worse than I could have imagined. It wasn't just extravagant spending, it was systematic fraud. They had been creating false invoices, paying shell companies that Marcus had set up, and funneling the money directly into their own offshore accounts. They had taken out a substantial loan against the company's assets, leveraging the good name and credit I had spent a lifetime building to fund their lavish lifestyle. The business was being systematically dismantled, hollowed out from the inside. In another 6 months, it would be an empty shell, bankrupt and worthless. "My God," I whispered, staring at a wire transfer for $200,000 to a company in the Cayman Islands. "They're not just waiting for you to die, Tom," Frank said, his voice grim. "They're robbing you blind in broad daylight. They're destroying your wife's memory." He was right. This was no longer just about my own dignity. This was about Martha. She had poured her heart and soul into this business. Her design aesthetic, her business ethics, her commitment to quality. It was all being desecrated. The cold steel of my resolve hardened into something diamond hard. This was not just a betrayal of a father by his daughter. It was a desecration of a wife's legacy by the child she had adored. But the most critical discovery was yet to come. Buried deep in a folder labeled Legal, I found a scanned document. It was the power of attorney I had signed. I zoomed in on the signature page. There was my name, in my own handwriting. But as I scrolled through the preceding pages, my blood ran cold. This wasn't just a standard power of attorney. It was a durable power of attorney combined with an advanced healthcare directive. One clause, in particular, stood out. It gave my appointed agents, Eliza and Marcus, the authority to make all financial and medical decisions on my behalf, effective immediately, not upon a declaration of incapacity. And a second clause gave them the right to transfer all assets, including the business and the property, into a trust of their own creation, for which they were the sole beneficiaries. I hadn't signed this. I had signed a simple document, a few pages at most. This was dozens of pages long, filled with dense legalese. I scrolled back to the signature page. My signature was there, yes, but it was on a page that could have been detached from one document and attached to another. It was a forgery, but a clever one. They had taken my real signature from a harmless document and appended it to this monstrous one. "Frank," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "They forged it. They took my signature. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Frank spoke, his voice low and furious. "Tom, this changes everything. This isn't just a family dispute anymore. This is a felony. Several of them." I leaned back in my chair, the guest house seeming to spin around me. The casual, cruel words I had overheard, "He's almost dead anyway," now had a context that was both terrifying and clarifying. They weren't just wishing for my death. They were engineering my civil death, erasing me on paper so they could carve up the remains. The nudge Marcus had talked about, the senior moments. It was all part of a plan to have me declared incompetent, to activate the more sinister clauses of this fraudulent document and seize everything. I closed the laptop. The quiet of the guest house was absolute. I thought of Martha, of her fierce pride in what we had built. I thought of her unwavering belief in the goodness of our daughter. A profound, aching sadness washed over me, a grief deeper than any I had felt since her death. This was a second loss, a different kind of death, the death of the daughter I thought I knew. But as the sadness receded, it left behind a bedrock of pure, unadulterated purpose. They had underestimated me. They saw an old man, a relic, a ghost. They had forgotten who I was. They had forgotten that I was the man who had built an empire from a garage workshop. They had forgotten that I had faced down recessions, hostile competitors, and overwhelming odds to create something that would last. I was not a victim. I was a fighter. And this was a fight I would not lose. My next call would be to a lawyer, not just any lawyer. I needed the best. I needed a shark. And I knew exactly who to call. The name that came to mind was Arthur Vance. He was a legend, a semi-retired corporate litigator who had a reputation for being as brilliant as he was ruthless. He had handled a complex contract dispute for us 15 years ago and had dismantled the opposition with surgical precision. He was expensive, feared, and precisely what I needed. People said he was a monster in the courtroom, but he'd always had a soft spot for Martha. She had been the one to hire him, charming him with her directness and integrity. I hoped that memory would be enough to get me in the door. I found his number in my old Rolodex, a relic from an era of trust and handshakes. His assistant was polite but firm, informing me that Mr. Vance was no longer taking new clients. "Please," I said, my voice steady. "Just tell him it's Tom Henderson, Martha Henderson's husband. It's important." I waited, the silence on the line stretching for a full minute. I could picture the assistant conveying the message to a gruff, imposing figure behind a large mahogany desk. Then a new voice came on the line, gravelly and impatient. "Henderson? What is it?" "Arthur," I said, a wave of relief washing over me. "It's Tom. I'm in trouble. The kind of trouble I think you'd be interested in." I spent the next hour on the phone, laying out the entire sordid story, from the words I overheard to the fraudulent documents Frank and I had uncovered. I didn't embellish or editorialize. I just gave him the facts, cold and hard. Arthur listened without interruption, his silence a palpable, thinking thing. When I finished, the only sound was my own ragged breathing. "The guest house, you say?" Arthur finally grunted. "Good. Stay there. Don't speak to them. Don't answer their calls. Let them think you're sulking. I'll have a forensic accounting team and a private investigator at your disposal by morning. Send me everything you and your friend Frank have found. We're going to build a cage for them, Tom. A cage made of paper and numbers. And then we're going to watch them walk right into it." Hanging up the phone, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The fight was no longer mine alone. I now had an army, a small, elite army, but an army nonetheless. My role now shifted from one of discovery to one of strategy and, most importantly, performance. I had to play the part of the grieving, slightly confused old man to perfection. The next few weeks were a masterclass in deception. I would make occasional, brief appearances outside the guest house. I let my shoulders slump. I walked with a slower, more deliberate gait. When Eliza or Marcus called out to me from the main house, I would cup my ear and squint, pretending not to hear them clearly. "Dad, are you okay over there? You need anything?" Eliza would call, her voice dripping with false concern. "Fine, dear, just fine," I'd call back, giving a feeble wave. "Enjoying the quiet." They made a few attempts to breach my fortress. One afternoon, Marcus knocked on the door, holding a plate of cookies. "Thought you might like these, Tom?" Eliza baked them. I opened the door just a crack. "That's very thoughtful, Marcus. Just leave them on the step. I'm not feeling very social today. A bit tired." I saw the flash of annoyance in his eyes before he masked it with a sympathetic smile. He was the kind of man who was unaccustomed to being denied entry anywhere. "Of course, Tom. Rest up," he said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "We're just worried about you." I closed the door on his smug face, my hand steady. Inside the guest house, a different kind of activity was buzzing. Arthur's team was magnificent. The forensic accountants, working remotely with the data Frank and I had supplied, were tracing every stolen dollar. They created beautiful damning flowcharts that showed the money leaving Hearthwood's accounts and arriving in Marcus's offshore shells. The private investigator, a discreet woman named Carol, was a ghost. She uncovered the sympathetic Dr. Evans, Marcus's golfing buddy. She found 2 other friends of Marcus who were prepared to testify that I had been acting erratically, that I was confused and forgetful. They were building a case to have me declared incompetent. They were manufacturing my decline. Carol also did a deep dive into Marcus's past. It turned out my son-in-law was not the successful entrepreneur he claimed to be. He was a failure, leaving a trail of bankrupt businesses and angry investors in his wake. He had married my daughter, not for love, but for a lifeline. He saw my family's assets as his personal salvation. Eliza, blinded by what she thought was love and a desire for a glamorous life, had become his willing accomplice. Perhaps the most crucial piece of evidence came from an unexpected source. I remembered the day I signed those papers for Eliza. Our home security system, which I had installed years ago, had a camera in the living room. The system recorded to a local hard drive and was set to overwrite footage every 30 days. My heart sank when I realized it had been months since that day. The footage would be long gone. But then I remembered something else. After a small break-in a few years back, I had become paranoid about losing evidence. I had paid for a premium cloud backup service, one that kept a rolling 6-month archive. Eliza and Marcus knew about the local hard drive. I had told them about the 30-day limit myself, but they knew nothing of the cloud backup. It was my secret. It took me a full day to navigate the archaic interface of the security company's website, my fingers fumbling with passwords I hadn't used in years. But finally, I found it. Video files sorted by date. I scrolled back, my heart pounding. And there it was, the date Eliza had come over with the papers. I clicked play. The video was clear. It showed Eliza entering the living room, placing a thin sheaf of papers on the coffee table in front of me. I could see it clearly. It was no more than 5 or 6 pages. I was visibly distracted, rubbing my eyes, my posture slumped with grief. She spoke to me, her voice too low for the microphone to pick up clearly, but her gestures were unmistakable. She pointed to the signature line. I leaned forward, signed the last page, and pushed it back toward her. She then gathered the papers, put them in her briefcase, and left. The entire interaction took less than 2 minutes. This was the smoking gun. The document Arthur had was nearly 50 pages long. The video proved that the document I had signed was not the one they now possessed. They had swapped the signature page. I immediately sent the video file to Arthur. His response came within minutes, a single, chilling sentence. "The cage is complete. It's time to choose the bait." Arthur's plan was simple, elegant, and ruthless. The bait would be the one thing he knew they couldn't resist, the final, complete transfer of the company into their hands. He had his team draft a series of documents that appeared to be the final step in their scheme. It was a proposal to dissolve the existing corporation of Hearthwood Interiors and transfer all its assets, the workshops, the inventory, the client lists, the real estate, into the new trust they had created. To do this, they needed one final signature from a bank official authorizing the massive transaction. Arthur arranged a meeting at the main branch of our longtime business bank, United Fidelity. He sent the request for the meeting not from himself, but from an associate at a different firm, posing as the lawyer for Eliza and Marcus's trust. He made it seem as though this was the culmination of their own legal efforts. The meeting was set for a Tuesday at 10 a.m. The bank's senior vice president of business accounts, a formidable man named Mr. Harrison, would be presiding. Arthur had already met with Harrison privately, of course, and laid out the entire situation. Harrison, a man I had known and respected for 20 years, was appalled and had readily agreed to play his part. The night before the meeting, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the dark guest house, looking across the lawn at the main house. The lights were on, and I could see their silhouettes moving behind the curtains. They were celebrating. They believed they were on the verge of victory. They had no idea they were walking into a perfectly constructed trap. I felt a pang of something that might have been sorrow, a final, lingering echo of the love I once had for my daughter. But it was quickly consumed by the cold resolve that had become my constant companion. She had made her choice. Now she would face the consequences. That morning, I dressed carefully. For the first time in weeks, I put on one of my best suits, a charcoal gray one that Martha had always liked. I shaved, combed my hair, and stood up straight. The shuffling, confused old man was gone. In the mirror, I saw Tom Henderson, the founder and CEO of Hearthwood Interiors. Arthur picked me up at the end of my driveway. He gave me a single approving nod. "You look ready, Tom." "I am," I said, my voice clear and strong. We didn't speak on the way to the bank. There was nothing left to say. All the preparation was done. Now there was only the execution. We arrived at the bank and were shown not to a standard meeting room, but to the main boardroom on the top floor. It was an imposing room with a long, polished mahogany table and a panoramic view of the city. Mr. Harrison was already there, along with two other stern-looking bank executives. Arthur and I took our seats on one side of the table. We waited. At precisely 10 a.m., the door opened, and Eliza and Marcus walked in. They were beaming. Marcus was wearing a flashy new suit and a ridiculously expensive-looking watch, no doubt purchased with my money. Eliza looked radiant, her face flushed with triumph. They were accompanied by a young, slick-looking lawyer, who I assumed was the one from Marcus's firm, the one who had drafted the fraudulent power of attorney. They stopped short when they saw me. The smiles vanished from their faces, replaced by pure, unadulterated shock. Eliza's face went pale. "Dad, what are you doing here?" she stammered, her eyes darting from me to Arthur, then to Mr. Harrison. Marcus recovered more quickly, his shock morphing into arrogance. "I imagine he's here to witness the smooth transition of his legacy," he said with a smirk, striding forward and extending a hand to Mr. Harrison. "Marcus Thorne, a pleasure to finally put this all to bed." Mr. Harrison ignored his hand. "Please, have a seat," he said, his voice cold as ice. They sat down opposite us, a palpable tension now filling the room. Their lawyer looked confused, shuffling his papers and glancing nervously at his clients. "I believe we are here to finalize the dissolution of Hearthwood Interiors and the transfer of its assets to the Thorne Family Trust," Marcus began, trying to seize control of the meeting. "We have all the necessary paperwork, signed and authorized by my father-in-law's power of attorney." He slid a thick document across the table. It was the fraudulent one. Mr. Harrison didn't even look at it. He looked at me. "Mr. Henderson, is this your wish?" I took a deep breath. I looked directly at my daughter. Her eyes were wide with a dawning horror. She was finally starting to understand that this was not the meeting she had expected. "No," I said, my voice ringing with clarity in the silent room. "It is not." Marcus laughed, a short, barking sound. "With all due respect, Tom, it doesn't matter what you wish. The documents are legally binding. We have your power of attorney. You are not in a position to make these decisions anymore." "Is that so?" Arthur Vance said, speaking for the first time. He leaned forward, his eyes glinting. "Let's talk about that power of attorney." He placed a single sheet of paper on the table. It was a still image, a printout from the security camera footage. It showed me, in my living room, signing a thin stack of papers held by Eliza. "This," Arthur said, tapping the photo, "is a video capture from June 14th. It shows my client, Mr. Henderson, signing what appears to be a document of no more than 5 or 6 pages. Would you agree, Ms. Thorne?" Eliza stared at the picture, speechless. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Arthur then dropped the fraudulent 50-page power of attorney on the table with a heavy thud. And this is the document you filed. A document nearly 10 times the size. A document my client has never seen before. A document that grants you, among other things, the immediate right to seize all his assets. Can you explain the discrepancy?" "This is ridiculous," Marcus blustered, his face turning a blotchy red. "He's an old man. He's confused. He doesn't remember what he signed." "Oh, I remember," I said quietly, my gaze still locked on Eliza. "I remember everything." Arthur continued, his voice calm and methodical, like a surgeon making an incision. "We also have forensic analysis of this signature page. It shows microscopic tearing consistent with it being removed from one document and attached to another. A forgery, and not a particularly good one." The young lawyer beside Marcus began to sweat, frantically looking through his own copy of the document as if seeing it for the first time. He was clearly a pawn, a junior associate who had been fed a line and had never bothered to question it. "Furthermore," Arthur went on, sliding a new stack of papers across the table, "these were the flowcharts from the forensic accountants. We have a full accounting of the systematic fraud you have been perpetrating against Hearthwood Interiors for the last 18 months. Shell companies, falsified invoices, illegal wire transfers to offshore accounts." He tapped a line on the top chart. "Over $1.2 million, siphoned directly from the company Mr. Henderson and his late wife, built from nothing." Marcus stared at the charts, his arrogant facade completely crumbling. He looked like he had been punched in the gut. "And finally," Arthur said, his voice dropping, "we have sworn affidavits from 3 individuals who were approached by Mr. Thorne to provide false testimony regarding Mr. Henderson's mental state, as part of a conspiracy to have him declared legally incompetent." The silence in the room was absolute. It was the silence of a collapsing universe. Eliza was no longer looking at the papers. She was staring at me, her face a mask of utter devastation. The greedy triumph was gone, replaced by the terrible, naked truth of what she had done. Tears began to stream down her face, silent and desperate. "Dad," she whispered, the word a pathetic, broken sound. "Dad, I didn't—" "You didn't what, Eliza?" I asked, my voice devoid of heat, filled only with a profound, weary sadness. "You didn't mean it? You didn't want me gone?" "I heard you. I was in my study. I heard every word." "He's almost dead anyway. Wasn't that it?" A choked sob escaped her lips. She buried her face in her hands. It was Marcus who broke. His fear and shock exploded into incoherent rage. You old fool!" he shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. "This was ours. It was owed to us. You were just hoarding it, sitting on it, waiting to die. We have plans. We deserve it." "Mr. Thorne, I would advise you to be quiet," Arthur said calmly. But Marcus was beyond reason. He stood up, knocking his chair over. "You think you've won? This changes nothing. The power of attorney is filed. It's legal." Mr. Harrison, the bank VP, finally spoke. "The document is fraudulent, Mr. Thorne, and as of this morning, United Fidelity Bank has frozen all accounts associated with you, your wife, and the so-called Thorne Family Trust, pending a criminal investigation." He pressed a button on the intercom on his desk. "Security to the main boardroom, please." Marcus's face went white. The rage evaporated, replaced by sheer animal panic. He looked at Eliza, then at the door, as if contemplating a run for it. This is a mistake," he stammered. "A misunderstanding." The door opened, and 2 uniformed security guards entered the room. They were large, impassive men. They flanked Marcus, their presence sucking all the remaining air out of the room. "Mr. Thorne, Miss Thorne," Mr. Harrison said, his voice ringing with finality. "This meeting is over. I believe these gentlemen will escort you out." He then looked pointedly at their lawyer. "And as for you, son, I'd suggest you find a very, very good lawyer of your own." The young lawyer looked like he was about to be sick. He gathered his papers with trembling hands and practically fled the room. Marcus didn't move. He was frozen, his mind unable to process the speed and totality of his defeat. But Eliza... She finally looked up from her hands. Her face was ravaged by tears, her makeup smeared. She looked at me, her eyes pleading, desperate. "Daddy," she cried, the childhood name a knife in my heart. "Please, Don't do this. I'm your daughter. I looked at her, the child I had loved more than life itself. I saw the ruin she had made of herself, of us, and I felt nothing. The space where my love for her had lived was now a hollow, echoing void. My daughter, I said, my voice quiet, but carrying across the silent room, would never have done this. My daughter would never have wished me dead to steal her mother's legacy. I don't know who you are. The words struck her like a physical blow. A guttural sob tore from her throat as the security guards took a stunned Marcus by the arms. He offered no resistance. He was a puppet with its strings cut. As they led them both from the room, Eliza's eyes never left mine, her gaze a silent, screaming testament to the abyss she had opened between us. Then the door closed, and they were gone. The silence they left behind was profound. For a long moment, no one spoke. Mr. Harrison let out a long, slow breath. Arthur simply sat back in his chair, his work done. I stared at the empty chairs across the table, the place where my daughter and her husband had been sitting just moments before. I felt a tremor run through my body, a release of weeks of tension, anger, and grief. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, and buried my face in my hands. I didn't sob. I didn't cry. I just breathed, taking in the first air of a world that was once again my own. Arthur placed a hand on my shoulder. "It's done, Tom," he said softly. "It's over." But it wasn't quite over. As we were leaving the bank, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. "Hello? Dad, it's me." It was Eliza. Her voice was thin and reedy, broken by sobs. I could hear the sterile echo of a holding cell in the background. "Dad, please, you have to help us. They've arrested us. They're talking about fraud, embezzlement, years in prison. Please, you have to call them off. Tell them it was a misunderstanding." Her words were a torrent of panic and desperation. She was no longer the cool, calculating woman from the boardroom, but a terrified child. A part of me, a deeply buried, vestigial part, felt a flicker of pity. "I can't do that, Eliza," I said, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. "But you're my father," she wailed. "You're supposed to protect me." "I tried to protect you your whole life," I said, the words coming from a place of deep, settled truth. "I tried to teach you right from wrong. I tried to give you a foundation of love and integrity. You're the one who walked away from that, not me. You made your choices. You and Marcus." "It was him," she shrieked, her voice turning venomous. "It was all Marcus. He manipulated me. He made me do it. I never wanted any of this." The blame shifting, the final pathetic attempt to escape responsibility, snuffed out the last ember of pity I might have felt. It was the last lie in a long, devastating chain of them. "Goodbye, Eliza," I said quietly. "No, Dad, wait, please, don't hang up, Daddy." I ended the call and blocked the number. I looked at Arthur, who had been watching me with a somber expression. He simply nodded, understanding that a final door had just been closed and locked forever. The legal fallout was swift and brutal. Faced with the mountain of irrefutable evidence Arthur had compiled, Marcus's arrogance shattered completely. He turned on Eliza, and she on him, each trying to paint the other as the mastermind in a desperate plea for leniency. It was an ugly, pathetic spectacle that played out in the local news. Their friends, who had agreed to lie about my mental state, quickly recanted their stories in exchange for immunity, leaving Marcus and Eliza completely isolated. The court proceedings were a formality. Marcus, as the architect of the financial fraud, received a sentence of 12 years in a federal penitentiary. Eliza, for her role in the conspiracy, the forgery, and the fraud, was sentenced to 7. The judge, in his sentencing remarks, spoke of a betrayal of a sacred trust that was breathtaking in its cruelty and greed. I didn't attend the sentencing. Arthur advised me it wasn't necessary, and I had no desire to see my daughter in a prison jumpsuit. My victory did not require me to witness her final humiliation. My victory was in the quiet reclamation of my life. The days and weeks that followed were strange. I moved back into the main house from the guest house. It felt vast and empty. Every room held a memory, but now they were tinged with the phantom pain of the betrayal. I walked through the silent halls, touching the furniture, looking at the photographs on the walls. There was one of me, Martha, and a 10-year-old Eliza, all of us laughing on a beach vacation. I looked at the bright, innocent face of the little girl in the photo and felt a wave of grief for her, for the person she might have been. I took the photograph down and put it away in a drawer. It was time to make new memories. Slowly, I began to reclaim my life. I went back to the offices of Hearthwood Interiors. The staff, who had been kept in the dark and had been worried by my long absence and the strange behavior of Eliza and Marcus, welcomed me back with a quiet, palpable relief. I called a company-wide meeting. I didn't give them the sordid details. I simply told them that there had been a period of mismanagement, but that it was over. I was back in control, and Hearthwood was going to be stronger than ever. We spent the next 6 months undoing the damage. With the help of Frank Peterson, whom I hired as my new chief financial officer, we clawed back some of the stolen money. We restructured the debt Marcus had burdened us with. We reassured our clients and suppliers. It was hard work, a mountain of it. But it was good work. It was constructive. For every fraudulent invoice we voided, for every stolen dollar we tracked down, I felt like I was cleaning a stain, not just from my company's books, but from my own soul. One afternoon, about a year after the sentencing, a letter arrived. It was from a federal correctional facility. It was from Eliza. My first instinct was to throw it in the fire, unread, but I found myself opening it, my hands surprisingly steady. The letter was rambling and self-pitying. It was full of justifications and blame. Marcus had ruined her life. She had been naive. She had been blinded by love. She never really wanted me to be hurt. Tucked in between the excuses were pleas for money for her commissary account, for me to write a letter to the parole board on her behalf, for me to come and visit her. There was one sentence near the end that was different. It was the only one that felt real. I lie awake at night, and I hear my own voice saying those words, and I don't know who that person is. For a fleeting moment, I saw a glimmer of the daughter I had lost, a flicker of self-awareness, of horror at her own actions. But it was too little, too late. The chasm between us was too vast to be bridged by a single sentence in a desperate letter. I folded the letter, put it in its envelope, and filed it away. I did not reply. Life settled into a new, peaceful rhythm. The business not only recovered, it thrived. Freed from the parasitic drain of Marcus and Eliza's greed, it flourished. I promoted a talented young designer, a woman who reminded me of a young Martha with her passion and integrity, to be my second in command. I started taking more time off. I traveled. I reconnected with old friends. I found joy in simple things again, the scent of sawdust in the workshop, the taste of a good cup of coffee in the morning, the quiet satisfaction of a day's work well done. The house, once a place of betrayal, slowly became a home again. It was no longer a waiting room. It was my sanctuary, filled not with ghosts, but with the quiet, comforting presence of my own resilience. I had faced the darkest kind of betrayal, a betrayal that came from my own blood, and I had not only survived, I had prevailed. I had protected my wife's legacy. I had reclaimed my dignity. I had taken back my life. Sometimes, in the quiet of the evening, I sit in my study, the same room where I overheard those terrible words. I look out the window at the sprawling lawn, at the guest house, standing dark and silent at the edge of the property. I don't feel anger anymore. I don't feel sadness. I feel a quiet, profound sense of peace. I had been tested in the cruelest way imaginable, and I had not broken. I had learned that love and trust, once shattered, can never be perfectly restored. But I also learned that self-respect, once reclaimed, is a fortress that no betrayal can ever breach. They thought I was a ghost, a relic of the past, a man already dead. But they were wrong. I am alive, and my story is not over. It is, in many ways, just beginning.